Good evening, good evening, good evening. Can you please confirm that I'm audible and visible by just giving me a thumbs up or writing yes, audible, visible? Good evening to all of you. Perfect. Thank you for that. We'll wait for 1 to 2 minutes and then we'll begin our analysis for today. Good evening. Good to see you all again. Good evening, good evening, good evening. It's been a long time, but yes, we are back with GS paper 1 and GS paper 2. We'll wait for 1 more minute, 1 to 2 minutes for everybody to join in. Okay. Good evening. Good evening. I am good. I'm perfect. I hope you're also having a great evening and generally your preparation is going well. Some of you I'll be seeing you from Sunday, which is we'll start ancient medieval art and culture on Sunday on 20th of August. Good evening. Good evening. But today and on 22nd, which is next Tuesday, I am only there. So basically, both webinars back to back today and on 22nd, which is prelims based current affairs, will be done by me only. So as you know, the basic difference between these two sessions is very simple, which is that today we'll be doing mains based current affairs, which is much more in detail, 6 topics, a lot more in detail, conceptual. And then we'll on Tuesday do prelims based, which is weekly current affairs. Therein, we'll try to understand what is the basic smaller topics, 8 to 9 topics. The simple point is that today's discussion is going to be more theoretical, and on 22nd, which is Tuesday, which is the coming Tuesday itself, we'll have a more factual discussion. So the simple point is that today's discussion, what the takeaway is that you have to make sure that you're conceptually clear. Today's facts don't matter. What matters is your conceptual understanding so that you can write a mains level answer in that sense. Okay, good evening. We'll give it 1 more minute and then we'll begin. Chandrayogi, I am not sure about that. I'm taking 20th of August weekend batch ancient medieval art and culture is with me. Other than that, I have no confirmation of anything else. Good evening. Kishan, come to class and then we'll discuss that. History needs revision, but it needs everyday form of revision. You need to understand it in the right way. So doing it over 5 months will not help you. Tarun, my most important advice to you, because you're giving mains next month itself, is now don't start to experiment with anything. Whatever you know. Don't open new books. Just make sure that whatever you've done till this point, consolidate. Consolidation is a very important word as of you, because if you start to open new books, then it will only make you nervous. It will demotivate you. So whatever you've covered, just consolidate that, Tarun. Make sure that you are not talking to negative people. Everybody knows UPSC is difficult. There's nothing new, or it's not news to us that it is difficult. Don't go to people who will demotivate you. Have to be positive, have to back yourself, and most important, no new material. Just consolidate in what you have right now. Okay. I hope, Tarun, that helps you. Simran, both have different purpose. CNA is more about daily newspaper reading and daily current affairs. This is much more theoretical. We consolidate, because what I'm doing is I'm summarizing for you July 2023, 6 very important topics which happened throughout the month itself. Everybody's ready? Can we start? Pulkit, I'm not sure about that. Okay, we can. Yes, great. Okay. So I hope that you are attempting the tests which have been given to you, which are called mains test series, MTS. I hope you are doing that, because it is a very important part of your preparation to know and evaluate everything. So therefore, I hope you have been practicing this, specifically people who are going to appear next month with regards to mains. Now, what are the 6 topics we are going to discuss today? First, a very interesting concept, which is the global south. This word You will see throughout the newspaper. This will most probably come in the mains examination. More than that, it's a very interesting international relations term, and it has historical connotation. Therefore, it becomes important to understand that. Thereafter, we'll discuss a bill which has been discussed on different platforms, but now we are consolidating it, which is called the DPDP bill, the Digital Personal Data Protection Bill, one of the most controversial ones recently. What I'm going to do is I'm going to consolidate everything for you so as to bring it into one space itself. Thereafter, a scheme which was considered a game changer, but things have not gone as per plan. Then the NRF bill, which again is interesting because it talks about research in India, and we have to discuss that also. Then two topics, one out of Yojana. As you know, we summarize Yojana and Kurukshetra for you throughout these Thursday sessions. So the Yojana and the Kurukshetra session, or these basic topics, we'll be discussing about agri supply chains and sustainable agriculture. Understand one thing, when we talk about the Yojana and Kurukshetra, here there's a lot of data which these magazines give you. I'll tell you how to look at it and how to make sure that you don't get caught up in the data or the basic data set or the facts which have been given by the examiner or by the author. So we'll see what we can do with this information rather than ratifying it generally. So with this, let's begin the first topic, which is the Global South origin and significance. If you've been in my class or you know my style, you would know that first I will give you the basic summary, which is I'll try to bring it down to the level where we can write an answer. Thereafter, we'll go into the nitty-gritty, which is smaller details. And last but not the least is the summary. There will be multiple summaries. Every topic I will end with a summary. Thereafter, whenever we are at least 3 to 4 topics in, we'll again try to understand everything. And in the end, what to do with all the information shared, I will again try to summarize everything so that in the same session, we are learning, we are also revising, and we are at least revising twice before you leave this session. That is the basic point of how I'm going to go forward. So, Pavan, if it's your first class, this is how we are going to proceed. Let's begin our discussion with regards to the Global South. Now, we'll discuss the context and everything later. Let's discuss the first point, which is this word called Global South. Now, please pay attention, because what I want from you is that you automatically understand this in the way the examiner wants you to or the UPSC wants you to, and generally you can use this term throughout your paper. Okay. Now, if you've done, for example, world history, if you haven't, not an issue, you would know that there's something called the Cold War. The Cold War basically was after the Second World War, when the USA and the USSR were fighting with each other over world domination, over ideological domination. Basically, it was a proxy war, which is that nobody was fighting on the ground, but it was spy, espionage, the concept of diplomatic warfare. Now, within this period, a very important term emerged in the vocabulary of the journalists and in academia, which is the concept of the First and the Second World. It's called the First World and the Second World. Very simply, the US, along with its allies, the West generally, was called the First World, and the USSR, which is the socialistic Soviet world, was basically called the Second World. Now, First World is the allies, or what we call as the West, or the NATO countries in that sense, and USSR with its satellite states such as Poland, Hungary, were called the Second World. Now, another term emerged for the countries which were getting basically independence because of the Second World War, because of Cold War politics, which is, for example, India, the African nations, and generally Southeast Asia and South Asia. And the term which was introduced for later encompassing Latin American countries also was the word Third World. And this word you would have for sure seen somewhere in books, for example, in general discussions on the BBC or in Al Jazeera, this concept of the first, second, and the third world. That the third world is nothing but the world which decolonized because of the Americans creating pressure on the British, on the French, specifically Europe becoming so weak that they gave up on their colonies, and that in turn created the third world. Now, what is common to the third world is their colonial experience, but basically throughout Asia, throughout Latin America, and throughout the African continent. If you want, you can add West Asia to this. Basically, what is common to all of them is that they were under colonial dominance or imperialistic control, and they are poverty stricken, developing, or are least developed countries, or are in a state of inequality, or there is a lot of issues in their economy. Basically, the word third world itself gave them a relegated position. It's a negative connotation. First world, second world, third world. Now, very simply, this term was problematic. And India and, for example, China were part of this so-called third world. And after 1970s, and I don't want to give you the details as of right now, there's a person who changed the connotation from third world to call it the global south, to call it the global south. Now, to give you a very simple example of this, let's look at the map, the physical map of the world. And if I draw a line generally like this, if I draw a line like this, basically everything above this line is called the global north, and everything below this line is called the global south. And as you can see, what is common to it is the Latin American countries, South America, Africa, West Asia, India, China, Southeast Asia. However, Australia and New Zealand is not part of this basic connotation, though they are in the southern hemisphere. So global south, very simply, is this concept that these countries together have a shared history of exploitation, shared history of colonialism, the shared history of the concept of being inequality driven, having poverty, and generally economically backward. Now, the simple point here is that this word has now become very relevant. And this word has become extremely relevant because of something which is happening in Russia, Ukraine. And we'll go to the second part of the discussion once you understand the basics here. So the basic point is, very simply, the first word which was used for all these countries together was called the third world. And thereafter, to make it a more neutral connotation, it is called global south. If we understand the concept of the global south, then we'll go into the second part of the discussion in why are we discussing this topic as of right now. Do you understand the concept of global south? Where does this term come from? Why have we used this term itself? Global north is, yes, developed countries. Global south would be developing countries. Yes, perfect, no issues at all. Understood. Great. Now, why are we discussing this? For a very simple reason, because the global south has shown a lot of character when it came to Russia and Ukraine. Very simply, NATO countries wanted the global south or the third world countries in that regard to take the side of NATO. However, Latin American countries, or we call it South American countries, India, even China, Southeast Asian countries, the global south generally has shown a lot of nuance. In the sense, they have not fallen into the trap of the NATO, and they have tried to develop their own understanding of this basic conflict and have not taken sides very clear cut manner, or have not blatantly followed the NATO in that regard. So therefore, what we believe is that the global south is now becoming a more cohesive, a more consolidated group, which now wants to think independently of the global north in that sense. Now, this is the first aspect. Very simply, the global south, as one of you are trying to say that it is the global north, may be the perpetuator of the fact that global south is extremely inequality driven or has been economically exploited. Totally fine. That is a very good way of putting it. Basically, the global north was the colonizer and we were the colonized. Very simply, global south is a victim of the politics of the global north. We all know that. If you've done modern India, this is not news to us, this is not surprising to us. Now, very simply, global south is one aspect that it is independently thinking. The second aspect which has come through is that the World Bank argues that there's a shift in wealth towards the global south. Very simply, the shift in wealth means that most of the emerging economies, developing economies, are in the global south. And if you take the four biggest economies of the global south itself, which includes India and China, the four biggest economies are much bigger than any of the G7 countries, which includes one of the biggest economies such as the US, England, France, and now the erstwhile what we call as the colonial states in that sense. Now, very simply, this shift in wealth and the fact that the global south is now shaping economic development, supply chain, generally demand and supply, the point of the matter is that the global south is becoming more and more relevant, and it is becoming more and more relevant in the current geopolitics. Now, please understand this very, very clearly, because this is why we are discussing it. GS paper 2, you can get a question with regards to the significance of the global south. The significance of the global south is very simply the fact that now we are shaping the world economy, we are shaping the world geography, and we are shaping the world geopolitics, in the sense that whatever are the flows, either India or China is involved in that sense. And if you bring in Brazil and South Africa, you basically the what we call as the four biggest economies in the global south itself, it becomes a power block in itself. And very simply, if there is the first world and if there is the second world, the third world ceases to be the third world. So the first point is that the global south is a much neutral term given to the third world concept, called what we call decolonized nations. However, why are we discussing it is the second part, significance. The significance is that the shift in wealth, more than that, the four biggest economies are in the what we call as global south, and over and above that, we are shaping global geopolitics. And therefore, it is very, very important that we all come together and understand the problems of each other and also go together in the right manner. Now, there are certain problems. We'll discuss that. What are the challenges? What are the points of what we call as intersection? But the point is, why are we discussing this? Now, please understand this. This concept will transcend this discussion. This concept you will see for sure in GS paper 1, in GS paper 2, and in essay also. And very simply, you can also see this word sprinkled around in GS paper 3. So very simply, this topic is not just about current affairs, it's more about understanding the international relations aspect of this discussion. So I am trying to give you academic theoretical knowledge so that you can use this concept also. Because by denying the word third world, we are also empowering ourselves by saying that we are not the third world, but we are the global south. Together, we mean something. Together, we control geopolitics generally. If this is clear, then we'll go into the nitty-gritty and then we'll go into the challenges and the basic intersections. There are three basic things which we have discussed till this point. Where does this term come from? What does it mean? And why is it significant? If these 3 points are basically clear, then we'll move to the nitty-gritty part of it. Yes, geopolitics means the politics of the world, geographical politics, geopolitics, basically international relations, geopolitics. Okay. See, Gulam, if you're talking about SARC, if you're talking about ASEAN, you are then going into micro. We are talking about macro. If you look at this map generally, there are in every different continent, there's a separate organization. There is a Latin American cooperation. There's an African Union. In this area, you have SARC, BBI, and BIMSTEC. Then you have ASEAN. You have even the SCO as a part of it, though if you add Russia to it, BRICS is also a basic expression of this global south, though you add Russia into it. So very simply, you don't have to go into the nitty gritty. You are going into the micro. We are talking about a macro term, which is called global south, which is this area underlying this hemisphere. This area is called the global south. India is obviously involved. Okay. BIMSTEC, BBIN, yes, all expressions of it. No, Japan would technically not be seen as a part of the global south. If you have any understanding of world history and how Japan, since this First World War, was much more part of the politics of the West and was much more integrated into the Second World War, as we know, and therefore it was one of the only colonialistic, imperialistic, if you want to call it, industrialized nations. So Japan is never added to the global south in that sense. Okay, so what is the context of this discussion? Russia is not part. Russia is the second world. If you paid attention, you would understand one thing, that what I said was that second world was USSR. So Russia is generally considered the second world, never considered a part of the global south. Okay. So the concept is, why are we discussing this? Because in the Russia-Ukraine conflict, NATO wanted African, Asian, and Latin American countries to stand by it. However, they have brought in their own understanding, which very simply shows that the global south is now acting independently, not blindly in that sense. Thereafter, the global south, now I'm giving you the definitional aspect of it, refers to the countries which are developing, least developed, underdeveloped, primarily African, Asian, and Latin American countries, have high level of poverty, inequality, challenging living conditions vis-a-vis the wealthier global northern states. Very simply, they are all linked to the larger concept of colonialism. Now, where does this term come from? So the Global South term was coined in 1969 by a person called Carl Olsby, but the first time it was used was after the concept of Second World was introduced. So the Soviet Union was called the Second World, which is the USSR. The First World was nothing but the USA and its allies. Third World were the countries which were basically coming out of colonialism. Now the point was, later we have in 69 abandoned this concept. So in 52, Albert Sevi actually used this word third world. Now, because it is associated with poverty, instability, and negative stereotypes, we gave up on this term. Global South is a neutral alternative which is used, and we all have a shared history of imperial or colonial control or rule in that sense. So, this is the first aspect. Harmeet, I'm not recorded, I'm live right now. Okay. So, the simple point is, global south is a term which has replaced the third world, and very simply, it is a neutral term to very simply challenge the concept of third world. This is the first thing. Now, what is the significance of this term? What is this global south to us today, and why are we discussing it? We are discussing it because there's a shift in wealth. More than that, it is projected that by 2030, three of the four largest economies will be in the global south itself, and the combined GDP of the BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, China, India, and South Africa, together surpasses G7. If you give a discount to the fact that Russia can be removed, still this whole complex is very, very strong and is very powerful than the G7 generally. Now, what are the challenges? What are the challenges? This is a very important point, because for the global south to go forward, we need to make sure that we are able to transcend these challenges. Now, the first point is we have discussed till this point the concept, we've discussed the significance. Anybody has any issue in these two things? Negative stereotype means that it has a negative connotation. No? All clear. Because now we will pivot towards the challenges and how we are going to cooperate in this concept. Okay. G7 is Group 7, one of the most important nations together. G8 it used to be, Russia was removed, so it is now become G7. The SME will push you the nations of G7. Okay. Now, we've discussed Global South, We've discussed the concept of significance. Now, what are the challenges? The challenges is very simple. We have gone through colonialism. So very simply, we were looted. This means that our starting point has been in a way distorted and we start lower. Now, very simply, the first and the biggest issue which we as global south countries have is economic inequality, in the sense that there's certain strata which controls a lot of power and money, and poverty along with political instability. Political instability may not be true for India, but for Africa, the simple point is that Africa is seeing both a lot of income inequality along with that mostly coups, military dictatorship, and political instabilities, all because of the fact that colonialism distorted these countries and in turn created the context in which it became problematic to even give transfer of power or basically give power to any group itself. Now, if you add these two, you basically would argue that it is a historical cause. Now, the other causes are basically an effect, but the most important challenge which India also faces, China also faces, and all these countries faces is climate change. Very simply, because these countries are vulnerable. Generally, food security, water, and general flow of what we call as nutrients or what we call as health, education, all come under the basic concept of extreme weather events. We are seeing that Himachal Pradesh is, as of right now, under a lot of stress, so many floods. It is basically getting battered by all the rivers which are now flowing 10 times, 100 times its capacity itself. We are seeing that what it will do is that it will basically destroy the economy of Himachal Pradesh and even Uttarakhand. And what will happen is that it will push people back into poverty, push people back into their income brackets which they were trying to transcend. So very simply, climate change, be it drought, be it flood, be it forest fires, all impact the poor more. So very simply, climate change has a differential impact on each and every country, but very simply, global south is vulnerable. The vulnerability comes from the fact that we were under colonialism. So the vulnerable group now trying to come out is obviously starting to see the effects of climate change. If you add to it two very simple points, education is a privilege. Even in India today, it is one of the hardest tasks to get an admission in a school. Very simply, education is something which is a bigger privilege in Africa, in Latin American countries where there's a lot of gang wars, there's a lot of violence, there's a lot of what we call as corruption. The point is that limited human capacity means that they do not have the right resources to develop their human resources, and therefore in turn the lack of infrastructure will also add to the fact that climate change will impact them more. So very simply, political instability comes from the fact that they were decolonized in a very, very hasteful manner. For example, India and Pakistan partition, they made sure that India was destabilized or India had a problematic border for a very long time. Over and above that, in Africa, it is even more problematic because there's race violence, there's ethnic violence, there's violence based on religion. The point is that political instability, as we see in Sudan, as we see in South Sudan, what is happening in Nigeria, what we see in Niger, throughout African countries, political instability comes from the fact that the power was transferred to the wrong group itself. Now, very simply, that will impact economy and in turn make sure that people remain within a certain bracket and economic inequality will be perpetuated. Poverty and political stability go together, or rather have an inverse relationship. The more stable you are, the more people will come out of the poverty line itself, and more unstable you are, therefore it will in turn create more poverty or what we call as economic instability. In turn, climate change and lack of infrastructure together create a vulnerability. They are already vulnerable and now they are getting more and more vulnerable. So very simply, the limited human capacity will make sure that their transition from maybe a third world to a second world, from the global south to becoming what they need to be, the least developed countries, the LDCs, are all in global south. And therefore, unity is something which is important. However, that is where the global north impacts or plays a certain role in order to make sure that global south does not come together. And very simply, the challenges are very big. So the challenges, very simply, are a part of a big cycle which somehow perpetuate the same problem throughout the same period in different ways or other. The simple point is challenges need to be tackled in the right way. Now, how do we tackle these challenges? What is the way forward? Therein comes how South-South cooperation comes through. These are the ways in which the gaps, the problems, and all are in a way filled, and make sure that the South understands its importance. We don't know what is our importance as of right now. The global South, unfortunately, as one of you pointed out, is also one of the most divided. In the sense, we have India, Pakistan, we have India, China, we have China, and generally the whole of ASEAN. Over and above that, Africa is internally very divided. So in South American countries, in Latin American countries, again, there's a lot of violence which is happening over different borders. There's a lot of conflict when it comes to it. So the global north has made sure that the global south remains divided. And therefore, the first most important concept is BRICS, which is Brazil, Russia, India, China, and the South African Cooperation Forum. BRICS is seen as a very important step away from NATO, from the UN. However, again, the presence of India and China is creating a lot of problems, because China, whilst it will go and cooperate with us on different multilateral forums, at the same point of time, they will do insurgency or what we call as terrorism in the Ladakh or in the Arunachal sector. And therefore, they have this very contradictory policy of showing to the world that yes, we are very good. However, at the same point of time, they brew conflict in that sense. The same is the way in which India tried to undercut this problem of India and China through what is called IBSA, which is India, Brazil, South Africa. But the problem in this is that India and Brazil can actually, in a way, cooperate on certain things, but South Africa has a different set of issues itself, and this has not taken a lot of momentum in that sense. Then comes G77. G77, very simply, I'm obviously, and you don't waste your time learning all the 77 nations, but the simple point is G77 or G77 is a set of countries which argue that there needs to be UN reforms, and specifically UNSC reforms, which is the UN Security Council should become more representative of the geopolitics of the world. And therefore, the Group 77 very simply argues for India, for example, Brazil, for example, South Africa, to be part of the permanent members of the UN. However, there's again a lot of politics in that. And last but not the least is on 12th September every year, we have the UN, what we call as International Day of South-South Cooperation, which is all the southern countries, or what we call as Global South, coming together. And this is a very simply symbolic gesture of all of them coming together. The simple point is, the problem with BRICS is the presence of India and China together. The problem with India versus South Africa is their priorities are different. G77 has a totally different priority itself. And the point of this very tokenized concept of a South-South cooperation means that the North is just trying to make a mockery of the South by saying, okay, you can have one day of cooperation. The point is, we all need to transcend the concept of what we call as the impediments or the challenges created by the North itself. Human capacity means human resources, people and their skills. Now, before I go into the mains question, tell me one thing. Did this make sense? If it made sense, I'll try to summarize it in a way so that you can use it in an answer. There are 3 to 4, 5, 6 standard things which I've discussed with you. I'll try to bring it together in one basic capsule which you can digest in a better way. Okay. See, G77, Group 77. 77 countries coming together for UNSC reform. Please don't waste your time in learning the 77 countries. Okay. I'm telling you what is the way forward. Why China is always problematic. Vivek, don't tell me that you're finding this. It isn't news to you that India and China have a problem. China has a problem with us, and that is linked to our historical relationship with that country. Yes, even after knowing that Global South is together. They are fighting because that is how the global north plays it. Okay. Now, south, south, global south, same thing. Okay. G7 and 77, obviously the two are different because one is 7 and one is 77. So it can't be the same thing. A G77 aim is UN Security Council and UN reform. Okay. ISBA is not better because of the fact that they all have different priorities. Okay. Now let me bring everything together. How do you use this in the examination? Or what do you do with this information? Very simply, global south is a term which is used as an alternative, a neutral alternative to the concept of third world. This is the first thing. Second thing is that the future of the world lies in the global south only. We all know that India is and will be a global superpower by the next decade or so. And the point of the matter is that we do control a lot of things today. If you add China to it, India and China, as of right now, are the two biggest pillars in Asia, which control a lot of things in that sense. We control demand, we control a lot of things as of right now. So the global south is a term which is a neutral term for the third world. And fortunately for us, the third world or the global south is now become a new sensation, a new force of the world itself. How do we argue that it is true, or how do we argue that it is the new world which is going to be shaped by global south? Because of the fact that out of the four biggest economies, if you remove US, three will be in the global south. Over and above that, we know that the wealth generation in the south is increasing, and India is increasing its per capita income. India is most probably going to be the third biggest economy, as we know, by 2040. And very simply, the point of the matter is, yes, we are the future. Now, how can the global north, obviously the global north will take it not very well, how does it make sure that we are still divided? So there are certain challenges which we all face, but they are perpetuated also by the global north. So we should not take them as neutral actors. They are literally perpetuating it. First is, we have a historical problem. Historically, economic exploitation, economic inequality, political instability. Add to it the fact that lack of resources and climate change is impacting the equatorial countries more, or is impacting the global south more. And the vulnerabilities which are created by the history are in turn getting more exemplified, or what we call as exaggerated. And therefore, the challenges are sometimes natural, plus the fact that the global north makes sure that conflict keeps on brewing. In West Asia, in Asia, in ASEAN countries, generally they are perpetuating certain types of destabilizing motions or destabilizing measures in that sense. So, way forward. How do we go forward? This is what you wanted to know. We go forward through cooperation. But BRICS, as of right now, is not the answer. It has to be more natural. What is the word we use for it? Is called organic. In the sense, you can't have five nations coming together, getting the sixth one. No, that is not the way you go forward. We all have to realize that we are the future. We all have to realize that we shape the future. We all have to also understand that the north is playing us, and therefore the cooperation needs to be more natural and organic, and that can only be done if all of us realize that our targets are the same. If we realize that our targets are the same and our aims are the same, we can become a force in itself. Now, this is the way you understand this topic. What is the origin? I've told you. What is the significance? I've again told you. Very simply, global south is a concept which you will see in different senses, in different ways. You can add Korea. Yeah, Korea would be part of the global south. Why not? The simple point is the way forward is organic, natural, strategic alignment of our issues, of our aims, and of our goals. Make sense? Then we'll look at the mains question. Okay, perfect. Latin American countries were the colonies of Spain and Portugal. Right. Now, let's look at the question. And I'll try to give you a basic structure of it also. In the current geopolitical context, discuss the origin and significance of the global south. Standard question, not very difficult. But to answer this, you need to have an understanding of how, very simply, the different aspects play out. So, here, introduction, body, conclusion. In the introduction, very simply, you need to talk about this term, which is what do you mean by the global south? So you'll argue that the word global south, very simply, has been used as an alternative to the word third world, and you can talk about the origin here. So you can use the introduction and the first part of the body as the origin. Thereafter, in the second part of the body, to talk about the significance. And here, you don't go into the challenges, you don't go into that. You rather talk about how this is shift of wealth, the concept of economies, three biggest economies being in the global south, the fact that we are shaping the geopolitics. And because it's 150 words, you don't have a lot of words to play with. Conclude by arguing that the only way forward is that though there are organizations, we need to come together in a more comprehensive way, holistic way, in a more natural way, in the sense that we understand each of the priorities of each of us is on the table, and we all understand that it has to be in that context itself. So very simply, the intro body conclusion will answer the question precisely. We don't have to give any other information which is not needed, because a lot of you write answers which you know, but the question is not asking you to do that. Write precise answers, which is, it is not asking you about challenges. So don't try to add challenges to show to the examiner that I know the challenges, because then you will waste words, and therefore then you will write less for what is more relevant. Right? Clear? Is this clear? If it is, then we move to the second aspect of this. Expansion of BRICS will make it more weaker. Makes no sense. The more countries you will add, they will bring in their own issues. That will in turn, BRICS expansion will make it useless. It will become SCO. See, BRICS issue cannot be solved until and unless India and China don't have a more amicable or a better relationship in that sense. Costa, don't literally take it as global south, that it is southern hemisphere. I know India and China and most of these countries do come in the northern hemisphere. It's a term. It's not a geographical term. It's a rhetorical term in that sense. What to write in conclusion part? How to go forward. World map and showing that the line is okay. Simrat, you will not have that much time to make a world map and then make a line. Don't waste your time. Okay. Now we move to the second topic, which is the Digital Personal Data Protection Bill. I'll call it DPDP, which is easier to go about. DPDP Bill 2023. Now, rhetorical means it's not a exact factual term. It's to give it more understanding vis-a-vis rhetorics. Rhetorics would mean symbolic meaning. Okay. Now, DPDP bill, can we now concentrate on the second topic? Because a lot of you still stuck in the first one. If I want more of your attention here, because this is again GS paper 2, very important question. Okay. Now, when we talk about DPDP bill full form is here only, Digital Personal Data Protection. Everybody listen to me, because half of you are looking, half of you are listening. So DPDP, I'm not going to repeat later, is nothing but Digital Personal Data Protection Bill, DPDP. This much I presume that you follow me. Now, if I start to say Digital Personal Data Protection Bill, it will become too cumbersome. So DPDP bill. Now, DPDP bill, very simply, has been in the news for now close to 3 months. Now, what is the task here is to consolidate all of it together and give it to you as one basic topic, and therefore please pay attention, because I am bringing in a lot of different concepts, which is what we've done in CNA, what you may have done in different webinars, bringing all of it together to basically make it one basic concept which you can understand. Now, The DPDP bill is one of the controversial ones, but its journey has been quite long in that sense. Because, very simply, when in 2017, under the Puttaswamy case in the Supreme Court, when the Supreme Court argued that privacy is also a fundamental right, there was a very important committee which was in news for quite a long time, which is called the BN Shri Krishna Committee or Commission, whatever you want to call it. It was established to very simply ascertain what should be the data protection regime in India. Now, what do you mean by data protection? Let's go to the basic level itself. When we talk about the basic concept of data protection, see, today you have different platforms, be it the mobile phone, be it a tablet, be it a laptop. Very simply, throughout these different digital platforms, you share a lot of information. And that information can be very simply divided into two parts. Now, please pay attention. I'm going into the bare basics of this topic so that you don't have to look at any other video or anything. Try to understand this in the most simplest manner itself. So, whenever you are in a digital platform, there are two types of basic information which are generated. One is called personal information, and the other one is called non-personal information. Now, very simply, you would know personal information would be your name, what is your sex, what is your address, what is your mobile number, for example, what is your religion, what is your basic location throughout this period, what is your school's name, or for etc. your father's name, your mother's name. This is basically what is called as the concept of personal information. Age, sex, whatever, age, very good, perfect. Now, non-personal information, for example, would be your basic location data, your Uber route data, the food orders, what restaurants you mostly order from. For example, you always go to a certain place and do a UPI transaction. You can argue that basically every personal information has a lot of non-personal information attached to it. So very simply, yes, Amazon orders, why not? Amazon orders, the Flipkart orders, what have you ordered in the past 5 to 6 days? What have, if you ordered grocery, what have you ordered? These are called non-personal information, all digitized, saved under your name, but it is called very simply non-personal information. Now, your browsing history would be a little bit personal, non-personal, both. If you have cookies, then it becomes basically personal. If you have basic browsing history, it becomes what we call as non-personal data. Web searches, why not? Web searches, the people you tried to follow in Instagram, the people who blocked you on Instagram, the people you tried to stalk on Instagram, did not follow, a lot of things. So very simply, personal information, non-personal information. Now, please, the simple point is you're asking me, is address personal or non-personal information? Saurav, you tell me, is address personal or non-personal information? If I know your address, can I reach you and cannot reach you? Obviously, address is personal information, and there will be no question in which they will ask you what is personal information, non-personal information. Simple point. Your image gallery obviously is personal. Obviously, it is personal. Anything which has you in it, it is personal information. Basic logic. Doesn't matter. I really don't care about what is personal, non-personal at the microscopic level. Now, the BN Sri Krishna committee argued that personal information should always be protected. Personal information should always be protected. And in 2019, there was a draft DPDP bill, or what we call as Digital Personal Data Protection Bill, which was tabled. However, there was a lot of criticism over certain things. Then there came a second draft, and finally, on 9th August, first the Lok Sabha and then the Raj Sabha passed the present DPDP bill as we know about it. Now, there are certain aspects to this bill which you need to know about, and we need to understand them in the right sense. So now what I want you to do is to please pay attention to what I'm trying to say, because now I'm going to summarize the bill for you and the problems with it also. So very simply, BN Sri Krishna committee argued in 2017 after it was argued that privacy is a fundamental right. So therefore, the BN Sri Krishna committee was established to go for a first data protection law in India. There were two bills which were tabled, never passed. However, the third time they've passed it with the following features. Are we all following this till this point? So when I say personal data, when I say non-personal data, you all follow me and you understand what I mean by that. And very simply, this is the digital space we are talking about. Very good. Okay. Now, what does the bill say? I know that it is on the first topic slide. I needed a space, so I have it. Don't worry about that. I know that. I'll remove this for you. Perfect. No issues. Now pay attention. Pay attention to what really matters. Now, what does the DPDP bill say? The first thing which it argues is that every fiduciary or every institution which protects or which gathers information, specifically personal information, needs to have a data protection officer. Needs to have a data protection officer. And when this information is taken by us, when the company, when I download an app and it's asked me for permissions, it needs to tell me what it is asking for, how will it be stored, and what is the purpose of that information. Very simply, I downloaded, for example, Instagram. Instagram says that you need to give you, or Insta needs contact access. So now you will say yes, but now under the DPDP bill, Instagram has to say what will it actually use out of that contact information, where will it store it, in India or in a Instagram server in America, and what is the purpose of the information it is taking. For example, it will use it to find more of your friends on Instagram. Now, data localization is something which India is pushing for, and that is a mandated concept that you have to keep the servers in India, over which the whole concept of PUBG came through. Now, very simply, data localization is a totally different concept. This is about digital information, but data localization has been pushed by India. Data localization, for anybody who knows or does not know, is that your servers on which this data should be stored should be in India and not abroad. Now, data localization is totally different concept. Data information storing is a different concept itself. Now, the data protection officer is there basically to make sure that all this data is secure. Now, the second thing which it argues is that if this fiduciary, for example, Meta or Facebook or Instagram, has crores of Indians' information is there, what they will do is they will do what is called data audit, and they will inspect how this data is actually stored. Permission, when you have ever downloaded a basic app, you will see they ask you for permissions. That permission is basically to use your contact information, your camera, this and that. Now, this data audit and inspection is basically to check, is the data being stored in a satisfactory way or not. So the data audit concept, how we have social audit, how we have economic audit, data audit is a new thing which has come through. Linked to it is that if there is a breach, if there's a leak of information, from 50 to 250 crores, a penalty can be applied. And that can be changed as per the severeness or the seriousness of the issue. If, for example, Instagram or Facebook loses data, which is a lot of data, this penalty could be higher. But the basic point is data audit and inspection will make sure that the penalty is applied if there is wrongdoing. Further, there needs to be what is called a consent officer. Digital consent officer, in the sense that there are certain things which basically need your consent. For example, parents consent for minor children to be on a certain app. And this consent officer's most important task is to tell us when there has been a breach, when there has been a leakage. Though it gives a lot of trust or puts a lot of trust into the institutions, we don't know about that. Most of the breaches we don't even get to know about. Now, these four are basically related to the institution, to the company, and these are on the company itself. Give us a data protection officer, give us a consent officer, we will do a data audit, and if there's a leak, we will penalize you with a lot of major crores of damages. Information has to be stored. But there's a catch here. Now, please pay attention. I'm going to now discuss the first problem with this. I'll come to the data protection board later. Try to understand this. Till this point, everybody is with me. Everybody is understanding the topic I'm trying to argue here. Data protection officer, consent officer, breach leak, data audit. Very good. Data audit is auditing if the data is kept in the right way or not. Okay. There are four more points. I will come to it once I've discussed the problematic aspect with this. The problematic aspect here is that the Act says only personal information is protected. Now, why is this problematic? It is problematic because, for example, we discussed this. If I take your Uber route data, if I take your Amazon orders, and if I take your, for example, restaurant orders and web searches, can I take out personal information? Yes or no? If I just look at your non-personal information, can I take out personal information? Yes, I can. If I see that you go from A to B every day, then I know either A is your home or B is your home. If I order from a specific restaurant to A, then I know, okay, A is your address. For example, I know that on Amazon you have ordered, for example, UPSC books. So by knowing that UPSC books you've ordered, I know that your basic age has to be above 18 years, 16 or 18 for sure. So I can get a basic idea of your age itself. From your delivery address to Uber route to food orders, this is called reconfiguration of non-personal data. The argument is that if you reconfigure or reorganize non-personal information, then you can actually get personal information also. So now the point is that the DPDP bill does not cover this aspect. It does not talk about non-personal data. So very simply, different non-personal data can be used to breach other things. So very simply, non-personal data is not protected. And I will show you what the exact act says. It very simply specifies only personal data. So the problem with all of this is that the company, if it wants, it can still gather a lot of important information about you by just reconfiguring the data which is there. So these four get undercut by the fact that individual profiling can still be done by non-personal data. So the first four were to protect personal data, but non-personal data, there is no definition of personal, non-personal. But we know that certain things are personal, certain things are non-personal data. As I said, name, father's name, mother's name, Aadhaar card, PAN card, obviously are personal data. Try to use your basic UPSC knowledge to come to this conclusion. What would be non-personal data? What would be personal data? Non-personal data is wherever your information is masked. It is indirect. However, through indirect information also, you can get direct information. right? If this is clear, do you understand with the first four concepts? Then I'll move to the next four and discuss the problems with them. Clear? Very good. Now let's come to the fifth, sixth, and seventh point of the DPDP. The simple point is, yes, are these the shortcomings of the DPD bill? Yes. The fifth point is that it will introduce a concept of data protection board. The data protection board will be an apex body which will act upon any form of complaints if it will come through to it. I will discuss the problem with the data protection board once I've discussed the other two aspects. The data protection board, the DPB, is a very important body, but the consent officer just makes sure that all consents are there. You consent to certain things, you accept terms and conditions. Now, 6 and 7 is more interesting. 6 argues that there are exemptions. Exemptions to any institution which the government of India notifies that it should be outside the DPDP bill. Very simply, it is arguing that this institution is too sensitive. It should not be under the DPDP bill itself. So very simply, the government of India can make a list of different institutions which should not be under this purview of the DPDP bill. And last but not the least is it dilutes a very important act called the IT Act 43A. Section 43A of the IT Act argues that if some wrongdoing has been done between you and me, or you are the company, I'm Facebook and I've breached your contract or I've breached your data, so the compensation mostly was given by the company to the customer. And very simply, the company used to decide what is the compensation to be given under the IT Act 43A. Now, DPDP bill removes the 43A section and says that compensation cannot be decided by the company, compensation cannot be decided by the customer, the compensation should be decided in court. Now, if you look at these three sections, you will automatically realize that there are three problems. First, that this board is more or less toothless. Data protection board. Data protection board is toothless for a very simple reason, because data protection board cannot take on itself what is called suo moto. It cannot take a complaint or on act without a complaint. Basically, I breached the data. Until and unless the customer says that I breached the data, government of India says that I breached the data, judiciary says that I breached the data, data protection board cannot act automatically. Simply, the data protection board will get a complaint and then they will do it. Now, you tell me one thing. If your data is breached today, will you ever get to know about it? Your name, your address, your age, everything was breached on the internet. Will you ever get to know about it? Never. So, how will you move to the data protection board? However, the data protection board knows that the data has been leaked, but it cannot act on it. Further, for example, God forbid, the UIDI, which is the Aadhaar agency, data is leaked. A lot of data, biometric data, your retina scans, your fingerprints, everything is leaked. Now the DPDP board has ex officio chairman, part of the telecom board. It is filled up with the people of the government of India. Will it ever act against the government or the UIDI officials who are responsible for the problem? Will they be ever taken to task? Never. So basically, you have not given autonomy to this body, and neither have you given it any form of executive action powers. So basically, as one of you very well put it, it's a mute spectator. It's just there to enjoy what is happening. If somebody says, sub, Something happened, then it will act. Basically, it will look or wait for complaints to come to it. So the Data Protection Board has no powers to execute on its own. The second is exemptions. Exemptions in the name of national security, integrity, and security of India. Now, this is again a slippery slope. You can add any organization saying that it is about national security and it should not be under the purview of the Data Protection Board. And if there is something which is happening, for example, UIDAI is added to this list itself. So if breaches are happening, we can't do anything about it. So this is again a little bit problematic, though it is important. Last but not the least, you tell me, very simply, does our judiciary have the capacity, the power they have, capacity, the time to deal with now compensations of data breaches? Again, no. They don't have time to take the major cases. Now they will take the compensation cases. Makes no sense. But unfortunately, this is the form in which this act has been passed. So before I go into the nitty-gritty, give you all these very legal terms, try to understand the basic points. 5 basic points are there. You repeat with me, and this is your summary. Please pay attention. First is data protection officer. Second is consent officer. Thereafter, data audit. Then penalty. These 4 very straightforward. Thereafter, data protection board. Then exemptions. Last but not the least, IT Act 43A. These are the 8 points which are basically there. Over and above that, understand this, 3 basic problems are there. The 3 basic problems are, first, that non-personal data is not protected. Second, the data protection board is useless. And third is that now the judiciary has one more burden on it. If these 8 plus 3 points are clear, then I go into the nitty-gritty and then I again summarize. If any point has not been clear, we are going to repeat it through the PPT. Clear? Okay. Perfect. Data protection officer will be appointed for 2 years, can be reappointed. See, Sunya, doesn't matter. This type of information you will not even remember in the examination. Try to understand the structure rather than their terms. Okay. Why the bill has been passed? Ekta. The government wanted to pass it. It had the majority in Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha, both. Yes. 43 has been cancelled. Yes. Okay, let's talk about it. Parliament recently passed the Data Protection Bill, second attempt in framing a privacy legislation in India. Further, the story has been very straightforward. 2017, privacy was argued as a fundamental right in the Justice K.S. Puttaswamy versus Union of India by the Supreme Court. Justice B.N. Sri Krishna Committee was established. Then the first bill was released in 2018. 2019, the second revised edition of the Joint Parliamentary Committee, taking its basic time to understand the bill itself. Then in December, a new version came through. Then August, the whole bill was taken back in 2022, and finally they've approved on 5th July 2023 the bill as we see it today, and on 9th August 2023 in the monsoon session, the bill was passed by the Parliament. Now, as we know, it is directly related to the B.N. Sri Krishna Committee, and very simply, it is based on the larger concept of the EU law. Basically, we are taking this concept out of the General Data Protection Regulation, the GDPR, which was passed by the EU very recently, and India thought that we should also have their own concept. Now, what is the salient features of the bill? Very simply, the first feature, it says that digital personal data collected within India, online, offline, or later digitized, and if it is taken outside India but is used for goods and services in India, then the bill comes into question. Very simply, the word personal is narrowing the concept itself, and therefore, very simply, the non-personal aspect comes through. Non-personal data is not protected by this bill generally. Thereafter, The bill will require for better protection of digital data, and more than that, there needs to be an appointment of a digital data protection officer who has a right to delete, modify personal data and make sure that it is kept in the right way itself. This is the first point, data protection officer. Then the concept of data audit and the penalty, which could be from 50 to 250 crores, can be bigger if the body is bigger. Very simply, data audit and data protection impact assessment, how we have what we call as environmental protection or environmental impact assessment, EIA. The same way they will have data protection impact assessment. They will audit how the data is kept. Is it secure or is it not secure? Thereafter, the next will be the concept of consent officers, in which they will keep within themselves all the power to tell if there has been a breach. These consent managers or officers will tell the government there has been a breach. It will make sure that all the data has been erased. If it is not been erased, why it has not been erased. Basically, two level of officers: data protection officer, consent manager. Last but not the least, strikes down 43A, which argues that the compensation will not be based on the company, but it will be based on judiciary process or judicial process. Last but not the least, the bill has given wide range of exemptions for states and its instrumentalities or institutions, very simply in the interest of sovereignty and integrity of India. Meaning that if the government of India says this body needs to be outside the DPDP bill, it will remain outside the DPDP bill. So to give you a basic summary of all this again, simple point: data protection officer, consent manager, right to delete and modify personal information. Fail to do so, there's a penalty. Data audit, data protection board, 43A has been removed. Government can notify to remove anybody, and in the name of sovereignty and security of India, certain things can be protected. So before I go to the mains question, again I'm going to give you a summary. Please try to follow what I'm trying to argue. Till this point, everybody is with me, no issue. Come on. No issues till this point. Okay. No, sir. Great. You're saying yes, sir. I mean, you mean no, sir. Okay. Now, let's try to understand this. What do you do with all this information? I'm putting in this time for the first two topics because these are heavy topics. Thereafter, we go into easier topics. First, simple. DPDP bill has the following aspects: data protection board, data protection officer, audit and assessment, because this can be asked in the examination, because it has been in the news quite a lot. For anybody who's giving the examination, much more important: audit and assessment, data officer, board, thereafter 250 crores as penalty, then 43A has been removed, and consent managers. Problems: again I'm trying to summarize everything for you. Non personal data is not there. Second, data protection board has no power. And last but not the least, 43A creates more judicial pressure. Clear, everybody? These two? Okay. Exemption by the government. Consent manager, you can add exemption. Okay, so let's look at the question. Discuss the provisions, very straightforward, but a very factual question which can come in the examination. Discuss the provisions of the Digital Personal Data Protection Bill 2023. Intro, body, conclusion. Don't write it in the examination. In the introduction, you will talk about that the bill has been recently passed, basically the current affairs aspect. Then you just talk about this. Do not talk about this. Please don't do that. In this type of question, you only talk about positives. Do not be a person who wants to criticize the government at all points of time. If it says critically analyze, then sure. But if it is not using the word critically, just give them the basic points of the bill itself. Please understand this. Do not try to complicate your answer unnecessarily. So you are, everything is perfect. The government has already passed the bill. You can't do anything. So by criticizing the bill, if the examiner has not asked for it, you are trying to just basically complicate the answer. That's it. 43A said that if there was an issue between, if there was a breach, if there was a compensation, if I was damaged because of a breach of data, if somebody tried to kill me because the address was leaked of Facebook, so now I am liable for compensation for mental harassment or whatever torture I went through. So previously, the Facebook used to decide how much compensation it should give to me. Now the company will not do anything. We will go to court, and the court will decide how much it is equivalent to that I was going to get murdered. That's the basic point. Okay. No, don't add problems in the conclusion. Conclusion is going to be that the DPDP bill has a lot of merits, and therefore it will help in creating a better regime. Try to remain positive if it is positive. So don't do that. Yes, the EU's GDPR has non-personal data also. Balanced answer. Okay. Burden on judiciary. As I said, don't try to complicate the answer in the conclusion. As it is 150 words. 20 words of good faith you can write about the bill also. I have given you both type of things. Just write that it is going to create a new regime of data protection in India. Very important bill, will create a better assessment and audit, this and that. Try to write the provisions in the body. Try to be positive in the second aspect. Clear? Okay. Discuss means discuss the points. Tell them the points. No flowery language. This is not an examination of English literature. Nobody is asking you to write Shashi Tharoor's language. If you are very clear, the level of the language needs to be NCERT level. If you read the NCERT, have you ever thought that such difficult language? No. NCERTs are written in a very straightforward language, the same way you have to write it. So, my biggest request to you, don't start to learn words for which you have to go to a dictionary. Don't hurt the ego of the examiner. अगर examiner को dictionary खोलना पड़ गया, then it's a problem. Then he will think, oh my God. Keep it simple, straightforward. Okay. Shashi Tharoor language means flamboyant language. Okay. Now, simple topic, straightforward topic. Will not dwell in this too much, but shows you how a concept did not work. Can I discuss this topic? Yes or no? Yes. Okay. Now, what is the Udan scheme? See, Udan scheme, very, very beautifully named Ude Desh Ka Aam Nagrik. Ude Desh Ka Aam Nagrik. Basically, common man flies or should fly. Ude Desh Ka Aam Nagrik scheme. Udan scheme, the concept is very good, which is that, see, in India, we have major airports. For example, Delhi, Chennai, Bangalore. And you have what are called tier 1, sorry, rather tier 2. Tier 2 and 3 airports. And you would have seen it for sure. For example, very small airport cannot have a Boeing 737 or a Airbus A380 on it, but it can have those small concepts. Ude Desh Ka Aam Nagarik scheme. Ude Desh Ka Aam Nagarik. Now, the concept came through in 2016 that why not incentivize the airports which are not fully commercially viable, because the traffic will not be too much. For example, I'll give you a very simple example. You have Delhi, and then you have a small airport called Palam. Palam airport, you would know, it's an army, it's an air force base. But basically, Delhi, you would get close to 500 commercial aircrafts, and you would have 1,000 domestic aircrafts taking off and coming down. Now, Palam is very close but can ease off the traffic of Delhi airport, but it cannot sustain 500 or 1000. It has the capacity of 20 to 30. Now, very simply, is Palam airport commercially viable? You tell me. Is Palam airport commercially viable? No, because there has to be proper traffic for the Palam airport to work. So in 2016, the concept was that what we will do is we will incentivize Palam airport through what is called viability. Basically, if 100 crores is needed and the viability of that airport is only 50 crores, we will fund those 50 crores from the government, either 80-20 in northeastern states, 90-10 in northeastern states, where 80% is given by the center, 20% by the state, 90 by center, 10% by the state, and we will fund this 50 crores. This is called viability gap funding. This is to make airports which are not commercially viable commercially viable. The concept was very simple, that if there is an aircraft, it has 100 seats, the government of India would subsidize 50 seats and fix the price at 2,500 rupees, and the next 50 seats can be sold by, for example, Indigo or SpiceJet at whatever cost they want to take. The concept was उड़े देश का आम नागरिक, so आम नागरिक, a common man, would be able to pay 2,500, and if he did not want to go to Delhi airport, he could go to Palam airport for a cheaper cost. So the concept was that 50 seats will be funded by the government, 50 seats will be sold by the commercial aircraft or the aircraft carrier. Very simply, 2,500 was fixed as the amount it would technically be there. Now, the point is that between 2016 and 2026, it was said for 10 years we will work with this basic concept. Viability gap funding was seen as a game changer. Now, please pay attention. The viability gap funding concept was seen as a game changer. It may be able to change the whole face of tier 2, tier 3 cities. For example, if you cannot go to Lucknow, we can have a small airport at Bareilly. For example, we can have a small airport in the eastern sector. Small airports which are not commercially viable may become commercially viable. The concept was, after 2 to 3 years of this subsidy, basically viability gap funding is nothing but subsidy, it would become automatically viable. However, why are we discussing this scheme? Because center sector scheme it is, yes. The problem is, now out of the close to 400 airports which were opened, 225 have ceased to operate, which basically means that viability gap funding did not work. This whole process of making certain airports viable did not work. Very simply, once an airport is non-commercially viable, even the Udan scheme was not able to make it viable. Certain airports went through the whole concept, meaning that they went through the 3-year experimentation phase, stopped. Some did not get the contract itself. Some stopped within 1 year itself. The point is that because they were competing with smaller route trains, in which 200, 300 rupees ticket was there, nobody was going to give 2,500 to go from, for example, Ranchi to Calcutta, because Ranchi to Calcutta is a very small route. And Ranchi to Calcutta, nobody was going to pay 2,500, or even Jamshedpur or Tata Nagar to Calcutta, nobody was going to pay 2,500 for it. If you have a small train which takes you for 180 rupees, why would you pay 2,500 for it? And more than that, these airports were not fully commercially viable. They were forced to work in that sense. So why I'm discussing this concept with you is this scheme has been in the news for now close to 5 years. I'm discussing it with you because it's a mains level understanding that viability gap funding, this concept of sharing 50-50, did not work generally. And this is a cautionary tale to tell you that automatically things don't work out. And sometimes certain schemes were pushed to a point where they were more or less not commercially viable from the starting point itself. So there are two reasons why I want to discuss this topic with you, and I hope you understand it. What is viability gap funding? You fund the basic non-viable part Buy governmental money so that it becomes incentivized, give subsidy. Second is the VGF concept, the viability gap funding did not work and is still not working in that sense. If clear, then we'll just look at the basic nitty-gritties. That the topic has nothing more, just the concept of viability gap funding not working. Okay. Pumping more money unnecessarily, perfect. Okay. 479 airports have been introduced in India under the UDAN scheme for regional connectivity scheme. 225 have ceased operations in that sense. So, Ude Desh Ka Aam Nagrik Udan scheme introduced in 2016. 10 years period was basically decided in which it will be done, but basically 3 to 4 years contract was given. Small, very small airports, airstrips were revived to basically serve the unserved regions and local routes itself. Now, the objective was improving air connectivity to tier 2 and tier 3 cities, basically towns and rural areas in that sense. And the concept was viability gap funding. 50% of the seating capacity of the aircraft would be subsidized. What was the concept? Airline will sell 50% at 2,500. Thereafter, the next 50% at their rate, whatever they wanted to decide for. Now, the pattern of concession or the pattern of funding was very straightforward. 80-20 for non-northeastern states, 90-10 for northeastern states. 90% given by central, 10 by state itself. VGF, or the concept of viability, financial viability gap funding, was seen as the only way to make sure that these revenue or these routes would exist in that regard. Now, you don't have to learn this, but basically it has different versions. First, it started with 128 flight routes on 70 airports. Then helipads were added in Udan 2.0. Then came 3.0, in which seaplanes were added. Then 4.0 came in, which more or less concentrated on hilly areas, northeastern region. Then 4.1 came, which was more about smaller airports, linking them with seaplanes and smaller airplanes. And 5.0, just launched in April of 2023, was about a little bit bigger, not 20 capacity aircrafts, but 80, 90, 100, so that it becomes more and more better in understanding. Don't have to learn this. This will be part of what you will get as the annotated PPT. But the simple point is 225 routes have ceased to operate. Why? Because 128 routes shut down after completion of the subsidy period. Some of them did not start. The company which actually was involved also went down, SpiceJet. Very simply, the point which I'm trying to argue is viability gap funding is a concept which you can expect in the examination, and very simply argue that it doesn't work if the project from the get-go is non-sustainable. If you understand this point, then we can move on to the fourth topic after looking at the mains question. You have to not learn the number of the aircrafts or number of the aeroplanes or airports, nothing. You have to understand the concept. That's it. Okay. So the Udan scheme raises the question with regards to financial viability gap funding comment, where simply, is this the way forward or not? So intro, body, conclusion. You have to talk about the scheme in the introduction. What is the scheme? It was based on viability gap funding. In the body, talk about viability gap funding and then discuss the recent finding, wherein 225 different aeroplanes, don't have to go into that much nitty-gritty. 225, if you can remember, have ceased to operate. That has ceased to operate because they were not commercially viable in the first phase itself. And once they completed their basic trial period, they shut down. Conclusion, viability gap funding cannot be the answer. Rather, what is called holistic development of that area is better than rather creating artificial airports which cannot sustain themselves generally. That is the basic point. What you have to remember here is viability gap funding is a concept. It doesn't work if there is no holistic organic development. Okay, bad economics as you want to say. Sure, fine. Now, the last major topic, after two Yojana and Kurukshetra topics, I will tell you what to do with it. The National Research Foundation Bill 2023. Can we talk about this? Then we'll go into the last two, which is Yojana and Kurukshetra topics, straightforward. Can we discuss this? All clear till this point? Very good. We first discussed the concept of DPDP bill, then we discussed the concept of viability gap funding, and we've also discussed the concept of Global South. Now we are talking about the NRF, National Research Foundation Bill. Now, again, there's a lot of detail here, but let me give you the basic understanding. See, the National Research Foundation Bill is the government's attempt to pump in 50,000 crores into research and development in India. R&D, very simply, 50,000 crores will be pushed through a foundation, which is going to be the apex body, which comes under Department of Science. Very simply, this apex body is going to pump in 50,000 crores. It is going to guide, it is going to encourage. But a very interesting aspect about this National Research Foundation is that out of this 50,000 crores, the government will only push in 20 to 30,000 crores. Everything else which is there is going to be pushed in by the private sector. And herein comes the interesting aspect. Very simply, in India, when we talk about research and development as percentage of our GDP, it is only 0.7%. 0.7% of our GDP actually is pushed into research and development. If you go to China, if you go to Japan, Korea, US, it is close to 2 to 5%, which is a very big number. And the 2 to 5%, 70% of that funding comes from private sector. In India, out of the 0.7%, 26 to 30% comes from the private sector. Very simply, the private sector in India does not actually push in a lot of money into research and development. So the NRF is going to push for it. Now, how they are going to push for it is the question. The bill does not talk about how. But what we believe is that it is going to ask the private sector to change its corporate social responsibility, CSR funding, in the sense that it will ask the CSR responsibility funding, which is pushed into sanitation, education, new and better research, the concept of education sector. Certain vulnerable groups are helped through corporate social responsibility, which is the private sector giving back to the society. That may be pushed into research and development. And the point is, does it actually make sense? Which is that you take out money out of education, sanitation, and what we call as health, and push it into the research area. Now, this is where it is on you how you perceive it. The bill has different aspects, all big words, but the point is private spending into research is a very big issue in India. And this bill is going to try to find a solution for that. We have to see what it does, what is its plan. But as of right now, what we believe is that it is going to be a diversion of funds rather than creation of funds. Now, this is not something good, because see, private sector will never push into research and development because private institutions want profit. Research needs long term investment, and it will give you maybe dividends after 10, 15, 20 years. They want right now the money to be in profit loss or certain type of vested interest is there. So the NRF is being seen as this new concept that it will bring in public private partnership in research. Let us see what happens. The discussion we need to do is, what are these smaller nitty-gritties here? Yes, it is versus concept. Is health more important or research more important? Can we actually choose between these two? That is on your ethical understanding to understand that can we do this. Very simply, National Research Foundation Bill or National Research Foundation Bill has introduced an apex body which will push in 50,000 crores into research. Don't know how it will bring in private funding. Other than that, it will foster research in India. That is it. I will tell you a lot of different small terms, but though they don't matter. The core issue here is, how do we get that 20 to 30,000 crores which is coming from private sector? I don't have an answer for that. The bill does not have an answer for that. But you need to keep an eye out in the newspaper on how they find a research or how they find a solution for this private sector issue. This is something which you have to keep an eye out for. It's a bill. I'll tell you the basic aspects, but this is the larger issue what I wanted to discuss with you. Can we divert funds out of certain sectors which need it into research in the name of creating research in India? Because that makes no sense. That's the basic point. So, Parliament recently, pass the National Research Foundation Bill. What are the nitty-gritties? It is going to create the NRF, National Research Foundation. It's an apex body which will direct scientific research in India and push in close to 50,000 crores. It will replace a board which already exists, Science and Engineering Research Board of India. And now the NRF is going to become the new harbinger of research development in India generally. Now it will have the following structure. It will come under the Department of Science and Technology. The Prime Minister will be the ex officio president of this board, along with the Union Minister of Science and Technology, Union Minister of Education as vice presidents. And it will also have an executive council, which will have a principal scientific advisor appointed by the government of India. It's properly government of India body with the PM also involved in this. 50,000 crores has to be pushed. The Prime Minister will be involved in making sure that this money goes through. Now, what is the objective? Now, here there are certain words. I am going to mark the words which you have to remember. To ensure that scientific research is conducted, funded equitably with greater participation of private sector. The takeaway is private sector, equitable, greater participation. This is the first thing. This is the first takeaway. Second is policy framework for putting regulatory process. So basically, policy regulatory process. Then involve universities and colleges in research, because most of our universities don't actually do research. Last, build research capacities in universities by giving active researchers money, basically incentivizing. So if you talk about these three, private participation plus regulatory process, remember this much, what I'm writing on the screen, plus colleges and universities are incentivized. 3 points. Can you remember out of this discussion? Because there are further points. These three are the ones which I want you to remember as of right now. Okay. So private participation, regulatory process, colleges and universities are incentivized. Now, promote research other than natural research or natural science, a point which I don't really care about. National priorities, identify and prioritize areas where science and technology can contribute. So let's add one more point. Identify areas of innovation and research. So very simply, identification, regulation, participation, and incentivization. So you regulate the process through certain laws and certain schemes, make the private sector participate, identify and incentivize the areas. So there are basically 4 points. Last but not the least is wherein comes the interesting aspect, wherein only 0.7% of our GDP is pushed into research, while in other developed countries it is 2 to 5%. So in India, the NRF's major role will be private participation in research. So before we look at the simple point of the question, what is the point of this topic? There are 4 basic points. Can I summarize this topic? Can I do that? Yes. Okay. Now, 4 basic points of this topic is the NRF has been established, National Research Foundation. It will bring in private partners participation, and that is going to be its primary task. Then it will regulate the process of funding. Then it will be an apex body to incentivize and identify the areas of research and bring in colleges and universities into the fold of research. If you can remember these 4 points, my task is done. Any difficulty in understanding the 4 basic points of this? Because Pulkit, private sector has more stakes in the universities there. The university model is quite different. There is private funding in the university, so there is more private money into that. Okay. Discuss the role of the National Research Foundation in fostering innovation in India. So very simply, you have to just do introduction. You will write that the NRF bill was passed. How will it foster? It will foster in India in the body part by bringing in private participation, by regulating the process of funding, by incentivizing and identifying the areas of research, and bringing in colleges and universities into the fold of research. Very simply, the point is that it will make sure that it identifies areas of research in which the funding should go. It will incentivize the universities and colleges so that they do research, and private participation is going to bring that 20 to 30,000 crores, which is needed over and above what is the government of India is going to push for. So NRF is not for just government colleges, for all colleges. It is for the research environment in India generally. Okay. So simple question, but you need to remember these 4 points. That is why I'm summarizing everything as I'm going on, because no one in this classroom right now has the capacity to remember the main sections. What you remember are the summaries or the paraphrased gist of that. If we are all clear about this, 2 small topics, and then we end the session by 10:30, 10:35. Yes? Okay. Anish, you can add it, but if not, did not discuss that aspect because it becomes too negative. You can't go into that sphere because there's no direct mention of that 8J. Okay. Now, the last 2 topics are one from Yojana and one from Kurukshetra. Now, you need to know one thing, that the Yojana and Kurukshetra magazine are important very simply because they are written by mostly the government servants, bureaucrats, and generally it is like the pulse of the government. It gives you a lot of information, lots and lots of information, too many scheme names, a lot of data. But again, we don't have to get caught up into that. The first one, the Yojana one, basically discusses about agri supply chains, and the Kurukshetra one talks about sustainable agriculture. If you have been doing your basic environment, you would know sustainable agriculture is something which you already done. But the Yojana one is important because it talks about cooperatives and how cooperatives can help in sustainable agriculture. Now, what I'm going to do is, again, you don't have to read Yojana and Kurukshetra. We are reading it for you and giving you the summary. Again, too much data. Try to understand the basic gist of what you have to remember here. See, agri supply chain means agriculture supply chain. Pay attention. Now, agriculture supply chain means that, very simply, from what they argue, from farm to fork. Very simply, fork, your fork which you eat, fork or spoon, whatever you want to call it, from where it is produced, where it is consumed, agri supply chains play a very important role, in the sense that if there is any issue in agri supply chain, automatically you see the impact here. A very good example of this may be tomatoes and onions. Wherever there's a supply chain issue, the prices start to go up and the consumer starts to very simply suffer. Now, what the argument this article makes, other than a lot of different smaller points, is that if we are able to integrate agri cooperatives means that when farmers come together with maybe an industry, with a capitalist, or basically come together and make an organization, cooperatives, and act like a company, it is called a cooperative. So very simply, agri cooperatives can be a game changer, because if agri cooperatives get integrated into the supply chain, they will ensure the supply, the basic demand, and will also make sure that sustainable practices are taken so that our agri supply chain becomes more greener and more resilient. Now, this is the basic point this article is talking about. But I'll show you how much unnecessary information is actually given by the article to come to this basic conclusion. What is the basic conclusion? Agri supply chain is important, cooperative needs to be included, and the farmers organizations, the farmer producer organizations, FPOs as they're called, and cooperatives, if they get integrated, they bring in best practices, and the interest of the farmer is also taken forward and protected. If you understand this basic gist, I will then show you how much data the article has given to you, and you don't have to actually go into it. Can I do that? Okay, very good. Now you see. Now you see how the article talks about it. It says that agriculture supply chain is very important, from farm to fork, from farms to fork, which is for logistical flows, transporters, shops, procurement, warehouses. Very simply, smart regenerative supply chains can be there, and that can only happen if it is based on cooperatives. What do you mean by regenerative? Which is that if there's any shock, it can regenerate itself. That can only happen if the cooperatives are integrated. Now, what is the importance of supply chain? They connect all the stakeholders. Procurement, marketing, distribution, all is under their hand. Further, storage issues, inventory, transportation, everything is linked to supply chain. Again, you see how it is beating around the bush, talking about the same thing but in two different ways. Now, what is the role of cooperatives in the supply chain? If the cooperatives get integrated, they get technical, financial, and operative support. FPOs can help in better input and serve as a platform of transmitting information, marketing, and distribution. Again, same thing in a different way. Last but not the least, they will help in better input, credit facilities. But the point which it actually wants to make comes here. Now, pay attention. Cooperative marketing strategies have progressed towards better storage facilities, effective management of resources, timely payment of farmers, and therefore they are the ones who can regenerate the supply chain with sustainable practices. Now, please, can you just remember these 2 points for me? Basic 2 points. This is the 2 points. They have better practices. They are able to give better timely payments to farmers. Effective management is there. Regenerative supply chain can only be there if they take sustainable practices. Basically, it is saying agri supply chain gets integrated only or becomes better only if cooperatives. This is the basic point. Then it will give you this. You see, the quality of agriculture inputs will improve, knowledge dissemination should be there, transportation facilities should be there, storage facility. But this is all meaningless, all meaningless for you. This much information is useless. That is why I'm showing it to you. Never ever get caught up. A lot of students, what they think is, if it is written in the magazine, it is has to be learned. I don't care about this, because I cannot bring this much information into 150 to 250 words. What I can bring into 150 to 250 words is this much. These 2 points is what I can talk about. That is why we don't allow you to read Yojana and Kurukshetra, because they can become cumbersome, unnecessarily complex. So, very simply, what is the way forward to make our agri supply chains better? It is expansion of knowledge, sensitization of the cooperatives, managing the risk through cooperatives. Very simply, next time when there's a question which comes which says that can agri supply chains be made better, yes, add cooperatives to it. Can you remember this much? I'm not asking you to do anything else. I'm not asking you to remember anything. I'll be the first person to say that remember this, remember that. I'm not trying to do that. I'm just trying to simplify this whole process for you so that you don't get caught up in unnecessary information. Yes, can I go to the next topic? I am not trying to go fast. I'm just trying to give you the basic information which you have to remember irrespective of anything. My basic task is this for you. That's it. Okay. Now, last but not the least, the last topic for today after this question, discuss the importance of agri supply chain management in effective flow of agriculture commodities from farm to fork. This is the hi-fi type of question which can come. Now, this type of question, importance it is asking. So it will, you will say agri supply chain is all stakeholders are together. Cooperatives can make it better. We can make it regenerative because cooperatives do sustainable practices. Farmers are getting more better income. And if this whole process is regeneratively right, then effective flow will also happen. That's it. So I just use the basic 4 points I discussed with you in such a way to answer this question. Nothing more, nothing less. That's it. Because this is the type of question which is asked. My task is to, after one after the other, revise with you as much as possible so that you don't have to look at this basic session again. Last but not the least, sustainable agriculture development. Can you, this is the last thing which I want from you, can you tell me sustainable agricultural practices? You've done your environment, you've done different aspects of static, you know it. I want you to tell it to me and I will then note it down on the screen itself. Forest organic farming, drip irrigation, smart irrigation, organic farming, mixed farming, organic farming, crop rotation, shifting agriculture, sprinkle, solar energy, organic or biofertilizers, micro irrigation, biogas, climate resilient crop, drip irrigation, agroforestry. Very good, Pradeep. Agroforestry is one word. Farming sustainable, terrace farming, mulching, micro irrigation system. See, drip irrigation is totally fine. Agroforestry is the new one which you wrote. Nano ammonia, ammonia, non-chemical management, multi-cropping, crop rotation. Okay, HYV seeds, home gardening, nano urea, nano urea, nano urea. Somehow everybody is writing nano urea. Zero budget natural farming. See, GM, social forestry, vertical farming. Very good. Ragini, vertical farming, social forestry, vertical farming. Have you heard about hydroponic farming? Hydroponic farming, which is that you don't give soil to the plants, just give them nutrient rich water. Very good. So, in a way, all the practices which aquaponic, yes, hydroponic, whatever this topic is talking about, you've already listed to it, right? I'll show it to you straight. See, use of fertilizer and pesticides. So a lot of you talked about biofertilizers. Yes. Precision farming, GPS. Agroforestry, one of you talked about how forests can be actually cultivated with crops in a way, or rather developed with crops so as to make sure that the wind patterns is better. Vertical farming, which is that you don't go for horizontal but vertical farming. Hydroponic, renewable energy, and robotics. Basically, all of you have given me the answer or given me the points which were written in this article itself. Now you tell me one thing. Do you need to specifically remember this? You tell me. Do you need to specifically remember this? No. Very simply, this was the static part, which is how can agriculture become better by technology? Biofertilizer, hydroponic farming, vertical farming, agroforestry, renewable energy, robotics, this, that, whatever you want to write. So that ways, we already know how technology can help. So very simply, what are the challenges in making sustainable agriculture? And the challenges are lack of awareness, lack of finance, inadequate policy framework, limited research, low productivity, lack of market access, lack of infrastructure, fragmented land holding, climate change. Now tell me one more thing. Any of these topics or any of these things which I wrote is something new. Isn't it common for any agricultural practice in India? There's lack of awareness, there's lack of finance, there's a lack of policy. Then there's lack of research. There's a lack of infrastructure in everything. There's a lack of productivity. The most interesting aspect is we have very small holding itself, and climate change generally impacts. So very simply, this Kurukshetra article was nothing new but written in a complicated way. So what did this article talk about? And this is what we are going to discuss, and then we'll end the session for today. What does this article talk about? Pay attention. It said that agriculture needs technology. I think we all agree to it. There's no problem with regards to that. Agriculture needs technology. First. Second, it argued that it can manifest itself in different ways: agroforestry, vertical farming, hydroponic farming, aquaponic farming. You have robotics, GPS, this, that. Then it argued why it is not happening. If you look at it, infra, finance, research, policy, fragmented holding, the concept of what we call as the concept of the lack of awareness, the lack of political will. If I write these basic points in front of you: climate change, if I write these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, these 8 topics or these 8 concepts in front of you, isn't this the basic problem with agriculture in India? That infrastructure is problematic, that finance is problematic, research is problematic, policy is problematic, holding is small, awareness is an issue, political will is not there, climate change is there. Then you tell me one thing. If I gave you a question like this: technology will play an important role in developing sustainable agriculture, comment. Do you need to actually learn an answer for this? Do you actually need to learn an answer for this? No. This is called application of knowledge. You already knew the answer. Introduction will be agriculture needs to be sustainable because climate change is coming. There will be problem. There will be problem. Political wills mean that the politicians don't want to push in money. Body is going to be how can technology change? Hydroponic, flanaponic, dhamkanaponic, this ponic, that ponic, whatever you want to learn. Then conclusion: the future of agriculture is based on the aspect of sustainable agricultural practices, though there are issues such as lack of awareness, political will is not there, infrastructure is not there. 150 done. This is called a general knowledge question. And for this, why I'm trying to say this to you, Kurukshetra Yojana are heavy. But if you look at it, they just refresh your static. And I hope I've also done that. So before I end this session, what have we done today? Vertical farming means that you farm in what we call as soil, which is arranged in vertical pillars rather than what we call as horizontal tracks itself. Now, first thing we discussed. Now again, please, Global South. We discussed Global South. Global South, a word which is used for third world. Basically, it is the future. Lack of coordination. Points of cooperation needs to be created. Second, DP bill. DP bill, what did we discuss? DP bill, we discussed Digital Protection Board, Digital Protection Officer, Consent Manager, 443A gone, audit, penalty, and the concept of exemptions for certain organizations. Third topic we discussed was UDAN. UDAN, viability gap funding, doesn't really work. Fourth topic, National Research Foundation. Bring all the colleges and universities together, incentivize and have regulatory framework. Private participation is important, and identify the areas of research. Fifth and sixth topic, cooperatives in agri supply chain is very, very important. And last but not the least, technology is important for sustainable agriculture. So if all of this is clear, thank you so much. You've been very patient. I'll see you on Tuesday, but with smaller topics, more crisp, which is Tuesday on 22nd, with regards to the what is called prelims based current affairs. I hope throughout the session you were able to revise with me and you take away something with you rather than having to look at the session again. In the same session, we've revised multiple times and you have learned something through the session. If you have, thank you so much. Good night. And some of you, I will see you on Sunday. If not, on Tuesday for sure. Take care. Bye bye. Good night.